Well, hello, folks, and once again, welcome back to Senate District 2. This is Texas State Senator Bob Hall, and addressing one of the subjects that's high on the list of everybody's interest these days, and that is our border. What's happening at our border with the invasion that's happening, the uncontrolled crossings of the border, and the problems it's bringing to us here in Texas. We recently had a seminar or conference, what do you want to call it, at the Capitol, in which several people came in from the border and around the state to address the issue of our problem of an unsecured border and what was happening to the people of Texas and America from various different angles. And one of the speakers there was Dr. Jon Spiers, who is eminently qualified with what he's been doing. He's both a medical doctor and an attorney. Like he said, that's an interesting combination of qualifications, but it has put him in a position to see firsthand, and I mean firsthand, involvement, not just observation, not just a night down at the border or a weekend at the border, walking around and seeing things or talking to people and hearing what they have to say. You're going to hear from someone who has been in this with his hands, firsthand, and his eyes, up close and personal with victims, with people that have come across the border to ravish our country. And believe me, that's what's at the heart of it, is the ravishing of America. And so very honored to have Dr. Spiers here with us today. He's going to tell us about some experience and what he sees out there. And I think you're going to find this both interesting and shocking of what he has to say. Doctor, welcome. I'm glad that you take the time to visit with us today. Looking forward to hearing from you again about the issues we've got at our border, because this is something that people need to know the details of how truly horrific the impact is on the people of Texas as a result of the failure of our governments to not do the job they're supposed to be doing, and that is protecting the people of Texas. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, Senator. This is always an honor to speak with you and to address my friends and fellow Texans. You know, we do face a great challenge, and the challenges at the border are many. Today, I'll talk about fentanyl because it is one of the scariest things we face. And I always preface a talk about fentanyl to give a little background on how I got involved in this. As the senator mentioned, I am a surgeon. I'm a heart surgeon. And heart surgery, for many of you who do not know and only know about the bad part of fentanyl, fentanyl is used almost every day in open heart surgery. Our anesthesiologists administer it to patients all the time, and they do it because it's a very effective drug. That's the good part of fentanyl. Now, I mentioned heart surgery. It's also used in treating cancer, and it's also used for treating severe chronic pain. So it's a medication that has touched many lives. And I remind people that all of us probably know someone who has, at one time or another, had this drug. But we've had it in hospitals. We've been administered it in a controlled circumstance. What we're talking about today is something entirely different. So I always talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly when I discuss fentanyl, because there is much that is good about it when it's used properly. Let's go back to where fentanyl actually began, because frankly, most of you probably never heard about fentanyl until recently. Back in, the 1950s and early 60s, physicians were trying to find better pain medication. And one brilliant man said, hey, look, Demerol has a lot of problems, but it has some good things associated with it. What if I could break it into pieces and create a better medicine? He did. He made two medications out of Demerol. One of them, I'm almost absolutely certain everyone here has had, and that is an antispasmodic that helps you with an upset stomach, Imodium. You can go buy it at almost any store now. The other one, the other side of this, was a drug that we're talking about today, and that's fentanyl. So he broke this apart and he created fentanyl. Now, fentanyl is a medication that has a very simple chemical structure. When you look at it, it doesn't necessarily appear to have a simple structure because it's a fairly complex ring, but to a chemist, an experienced chemist, it's very easy to make. And in fact, that is one of the reasons that fentanyl revolutionized cardiovascular anesthesia. It was easy to make, it was short in onset and had a predictable duration of effect, and it was inexpensive. Now, I want you to remember those things: inexpensive and easy to make. Those sound really good to a pharmaceutical company. They also sound really good to some bad guys. Now, when it comes to making fentanyl, it's a patented drug. And so when Dr. Janssen patented this medication, he submitted a patent to the United States Patent Office. What's the downside of having a patent like this? You and I can go online and look up this patent. And in the patent, it tells you how to make the drug. That's just be aware of that. It tells you step by step how to make the drug. Now that's pretty scary. But for many years, nobody abused this drug. Occasionally a doctor or a nurse would abuse it, but it was not trafficked on the street. In the Drug Enforcement Agency, I have spoken to agents about this. They said it was so deadly, they could not conceive of anyone ever using it. And so no one did. It became really a legitimate industry was built up around this drug, treating pain and treating it as an anesthetic. But then in the early 1990s, the Drug Enforcement Agency started seeing fentanyl appear on the streets. And it was, for all intents and purposes, to them terrifying. They were used to seeing heroin. They were used to seeing methamphetamine and cocaine, marijuana, other medications, but fentanyl suddenly presented a real problem to it. Why? There was a chemist, a high school graduate from Wichita, Kansas, who figured out by going to the patent office and reading the patents how to make fentanyl. And he started making it, and he started selling it. And suddenly, the entire spectrum of drug abuse changed. Now, I mentioned that it's easy to prepare. And you've got the formula there at the patent office, and it tells you exactly step by step how to make it. What fancy equipment do you need? Well, let's talk about a trip to Home Depot. You go and you buy some 5-gallon buckets, and you get yourself a painter's suit, you get a mask, and you can make fentanyl. You have the equipment you need. You have to have the precursors next. And that's something that was very difficult for people until China started sharing with the rest of the world. Now, to put some things in perspective, fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. And heroin has been a major problem in the United States for years. Fentanyl is cheaper to manufacture than heroin, okay? 50 times stronger and cheaper to make. So if you want to process heroin, you've got to grow poppies. So you've got to have a farmer, you've got to have land, you've got to have proper weather. All sorts of things have to add up in your favor. So it costs between $5,000 and $10,000 to make a kilogram of heroin. That's a lot of heroin. It's a lot of lives wasted. That's a lot of danger. What does it take to make a kilogram of fentanyl that is 50 times stronger than heroin? About $300. Fentanyl is synthetic. There's no crop base. It doesn't require farms or farmers. And as an aside, and the senator will appreciate this, if you put people out of work, they're going to try to find either another job or they're going to find another place to go where they can find work. So as we put these farmers out of business, they either join the cartels or they try to come to the United States. The other thing about fentanyl is that you can make it in a small space, about a 10 by 10 area. You just set up a little place under a tent outside, and you can set your lab up. And when the authorities come for you, what do? You just pack it up and leave, or you just abandon it and move on because you can replace all the equipment. So fentanyl is not only potent, the facility to manufacture it is portable. And because it is more potent than heroin, you can take something that might require a space this large and you can compress it and make it much, much smaller. Many of you have seen a photograph of a penny, a United States penny, with these 3 little grains next to it. To give you an idea, you take 3 grains of sugar, 3 grains of sugar. That's about the size of a pretty potent dose of fentanyl. And in fact, for many of us, that would be a lethal dose. Just 3 grains. 3 grains of salt, 3 grains of sugar. It is deadly. Now, when we talk about pain medications, I always remind people that many of these medications start out with a good purpose. Fentanyl is one of them. And then it can be perverted and subverted to the bad. Fentanyl is part of a class of synthetic opioids that is actually plaguing the United States. We've seen heroin for years has just caused so many deaths, but lately we've seen heroin start to fall off as the rise of the synthetic opioids. You probably have seen the statistic recently where over 100,000, almost 110,000 Americans died from synthetic opioids. Synthetic opioids is kind of a business speak for fentanyl. And that has taken off. That is about 80% of those are from fentanyl. And it's only growing. In 2021, 66% or more of the deaths from drug overdoses, and the leading cause of death for people between the ages of 18 and 45 is fentanyl. Someone dies from fentanyl probably every 7.5 minutes. While we've been talking, while the senator and I have been talking, several people have died from a fentanyl overdose. During the course of this discussion, many people will die, 300 people a day. It's terrible. Fentanyl is also, for the cartels, easy to alter. This has posed a real problem for drug enforcement and has posed a problem for physicians caring for these folks. The senator mentioned earlier that I interfaced with patients that had been affected by their lives had been changed, ruined with fentanyl. For the patients that needed it for anesthesia, the anesthesiologist did a great job with them. But when patients come into the hospital after a fentanyl overdose, at first we didn't really know what was happening. We'd treat them for a narcotic overdose, and we would have to give them more treatment, and more treatment, and more treatment. And unfortunately, many people lost their life as we were trying to figure out what to do. And also, we see people that are faced with just a horrible decision. Do they enter sexual slavery? Do they transport drugs for the cartels? And so my very first exposure to someone illegally using fentanyl was when a young woman came into the hospital. She had a tattoo on her chest, which my nursing staff told me meant she was owned by a cartel. Owned. I said that. She was owned by a cartel. And she had been transporting some fentanyl and some other drugs that she had swallowed. They were wrapped in a wrapper that she had swallowed. One of them had burst, and she was dying. We operated on her. We were able to save her. But it just stunned me to see this and to knowing how deadly it was, to know that someone was taking this chance. And it is truly an absolute scourge. You can take fentanyl and break off a piece of, they call it cleaving off a substance, a piece of the substance, and put something else on there. And you can make what is called a fentanyl-related substance. This has posed a challenge for law enforcement because for many years, for something to be illegal, we had to actually name it. We would say fentanyl is illegal. So if you broke off a piece of fentanyl and put a different subgroup, a different chemical subgroup on there, that suddenly made it not illegal. And so they would have to redefine it. They were constantly adding things to the controlled substance list. Finally, the Food and Drug Administration said, enough is enough. We've got to have some help. And they outlawed an entire class of substances. They call them fentanyl-related substances that are all controlled. Now, why is that important? Because there's a nation that really does not care about the United States. They see us as a threat to their way of life, and they're a threat to our way of life. They want us out of the way in their pursuit of world domination, and that's China. So China, for many years, has manufactured fentanyl, and believe it or not, people would package this up in like a FedEx envelope and ship it to the United States. Remember, it's very potent. So they could put a small amount in an international envelope and send it to the United States. And now you may think that that won't get through, but when you send thousands and thousands and thousands of packages through the mail, we'll probably catch a lot of them. You don't catch all of them. So we said, no, we don't want you to do that. We worked with China during President Trump's administration back in 2019. China officially controlled, and I use that term loosely, control all forms of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors. They said, we're going to crack down on this. Now, where do we get fentanyl precursors? Where do we see them produced? Where do we see fentanyl produced? The fentanyl analogs, those changed medications, where do they come from? They still come from China. They just don't come directly to the United States as often. They come from China to Mexico, and generally from there right into the United States. But the Mexicans are getting smarter and smarter. The cartels are actually doing the entire process themselves as well. Other countries are guilty. There's some folks in India. They do the same thing. They ship it to Mexico and into the United States. And of course, here in the United States, some unfortunately misguided folks dabble in this as well. But the main source of fentanyl precursors and fentanyl production is China. Goes to Mexico, and from Mexico comes straight into the United States. How does it get here? From there. That is the big question. And you will hear experts argue about it all the time because they'll say, what we know, okay? What we know. That means that someone has intercepted a transport of fentanyl. They have seen it, touched it, seized it, and locked it up. And the person bringing it is going to jail. Most of the time, that happens at a port of entry. Laredo is an area where you can put, on the southern side, you can put fentanyl in a truck, ship that truck right across the border, and we hope that we intercept it, okay? And most of the time we do. We intercept a lot. But the question that we have, the question that I worry about, and the senator worries about, everyone worries about, we want to get everything that's coming into these ports of entry, but we want to know what's coming in between the ports of entry and how much is coming in. We don't have a clue. We really don't know. Why? Because someone can take a baggie and put a bunch of pills in it and hike across the desert into the United States, and we'll never know about it. That's the challenge. Someone can attach it to a drone and fly it into the United States, and we don't even know it. Someone can just walk up to the wall and throw something over the barrier or pass it through the slats of the vertical barrier. There are all sorts of ways to get it into the United States, and we can't cover every square foot of our border. And believe it or not, many people, they get their impression of dealing with the cartels from television, and they see some situation comedy, or they see some drama, and they think, oh, that must be what the drug cartels are like. These guys are smart. These guys are sophisticated. They are sharp businessmen, but they have an evil bent. They build submarines that are capable of traveling from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, from South America to Europe. They'll traverse the entire Atlantic Ocean. So for them, it's nothing to go from Colombia, for example, or parts of Mexico to the United States by water, by a remote controlled submarine that's being controlled from a ship or airplane nearby. These guys, they know no end to their ingenuity. These drones that they put in the sea can carry tons of drugs, but the ones they put in the air, most people, when we talk about drones, they think of these little small drones that you can buy. You may have one, your children may have one. You see them all around. You think, oh, these are great. They're small. They can't carry much. No, you can get a drone that can carry over 400 pounds or more, that can go not just a few yards, not a few hundred yards, but miles away from where you are. You could actually go on Amazon.com right now and purchase a drone that we see flying back and forth across the border all the time, all the time. And how much is that drone? About $1,500. Think about that, $1,500. So about $300 to make a kilogram of fentanyl that's going to have street value that's just incredible. And then you invest a small amount of money in buying a drone. And let's face it, if the drone is captured, shot down, destroyed, damaged, that's okay. That's the price of doing business for these guys. That's their price of doing business. Absolutely terrible. Now, anytime we talk about getting the drug into the United States, people will ask me, what are some of the types of drug? What do they look like? What is the means that they get it here? Is it coming in as a powder? Sure, it does. Sometimes it comes in as a powder. It can come in as a white powder wrapped in a brick that you may have seen on television. And you think, oh, well, that's pretty interesting, but how is that going to be used on the street? Well, they can sell just little packets of powder. People can actually heat that up. They can inject it. They can smoke it. They can rub it on their gums. They can, I mean, there are all sorts of ways they can do it. Their goal, of course, is to actually absorb the chemical. But there is something that has arisen that is, I think, one of the scariest things out there that absolutely terrifies me. And that is, they've started making pills. They've started making pills. How do you make pills? I mentioned Amazon a few moments ago. You can actually go online and you can buy what is called a pill press. A pill press. A pill press has a die, a press that you put some powder in it and you put some force on it and it shapes it into a particular form. That's the way they make your pills every day. So what the cartels have done is they thought, hey, there's a neat way we can do this. We can make these into pills that look like either legitimate medicines that people take every day. And we can flood the market with that. So people say, hey, I've seen this before. I have taken this before. This must be okay. It's not. Children are dying. Young people are dying every day because they take what they think is a medicine they shouldn't be taking. Let's be honest. They should not be taking this medicine. And they ought to recognize that they're doing something wrong. But they think, I have broke my leg a while back and I took this particular medicine. It made me feel better. And I would like to have that feeling again. And I can't get a prescription for it. So I am going to buy one from someone on the street. And since it looks like what I've taken, it must be the same thing. And it's not. And they wind up dying. How do they make these? What quantities do they make? You know what? We don't know for sure, but we know they're in the thousands. And they're getting more clever. In one day, you could take a hand crank press, and you can make a few 100,000 tablets. And that'll cost you just a few $1,000s for the machine. A few $1,000s for the machine. And if you're doing your math at home, you can add all these things up and you realize I haven't talked about a whole lot of money to make these products. If you're fairly ambitious, you could spend $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 and make an automated machine that will make almost 1 million tablets a day that look just like pain medication you would buy in the United States, that you would go to your pharmacy to get. In fact, I've spoken to some agents from the Drug Enforcement Agency who are experts at this. They see it all the time, and they can't tell the difference between a fake pill and a real pill just by looking at it. They actually have to test it to know.
And John, you with this point that you're talking about where they're fooling people into taking something which is going to end up just people dying. And
Absolutely.
It's probably not going to be a customer that paid for the fentanyl out there. And so the thing I think it confuses a lot of people is, why in the world would they be doing something that just has as its objective the killing of people? Because I've heard over and over again about the candy laced fentanyl that's designed to kill children. That's kind of counterintuitive to someone whose primary objective, we've all thought all along, was to make money. So why are they doing this way?
And that's the question that many of us have been asking. It made no sense. Why do you want to kill your customers? Recently, we've kind of had this terrible feeling that the cartels just did not care. And it's not just that they don't care. Recently, some bad guys get captured every now and then, and they get interrogated and they reveal what they really are planning. They don't care if it kills Americans. In fact, some of them say that's part of their goal. And I think we have to examine the diabolical plot there. If China is selling these drugs and providing a constant supply to the cartels, and China is our rival on the world stage, China does not really have the United States' best interests at heart. We should recognize that they're not a good neighbor and they're not a good partner. And they're providing this to Mexico. In Mexico, the Mexican cartels, let's call it what the cartels, don't care if we die. China doesn't care if we die. So that's their motivation. They don't care if they kill your children. The human life is not important to them. It is just a commodity that they can buy, sell, and destroy at will. And here in the United States, we have a population of about 330 million people. Last year, about 11,200 pounds of fentanyl came into the United States. 11,000 pounds. That is, if you remember, 2 to 4 milligrams is a lethal dose. Those little tiny grains are a lethal dose. So how much is coming to the United States? Enough to kill every American. And this is based on what we know, not what we guess, what we know. Enough fentanyl to kill the United States population about 4 times over. Enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States. They don't care.
That alone, Jon, is something that puts an entirely different face on our open border issue. It's one thing to talk about to dress it up and use the color of lipstick that paints it as these are just refugees that are coming in here and that are fleeing oppression from another country. Now we know that's a lie, but for the overwhelming majority of them, because most of them come through 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 countries before they get to the United States. They could have been a refugee in any one of those countries if that were true. But let's say we accept that they're coming here as a refugee. And so that gives you an entirely different picture of what's happening. But you look at it when you understand that all of that is to cover over their transport of drugs illegally to make a whole lot of money, but in the process having this collateral damage that's being done just because they come from a mindset that they don't care about life. The issue of trying to have an open border is one that says we care about life. We care about people who are oppressed, and we should let them come here so they have a better life. That's a heart and a mind that says we care about people. This one is one that's just the opposite of that. That is what's being used to cover up a very diabolical operation that's going on, that's designed to kill Americans, designed to destroy America eventually. When you talk about enough here to have killed the population 4 times over, that's really scary that's happening. And the number of people that have, which puts the issue of our open border into a different light when you back up and look at the real objective and what is happening here is that those people who are streaming across the border are a smokescreen. They are a cover-up, a distraction to occupy our law enforcement, to occupy our time and bring criticisms to those who would say, wait a minute, we've got to shut our border down. That they're saying, but those people need help. Well, yes, maybe some of them do need help, but there's a proper way to give them help. Yes. But the way we're doing it is allowing for something so that we're letting the very hardcore criminal effort use that as a smokescreen, not just for the fentanyl aspect, but for the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, and the things that they're doing in addition to that. that keeps us from doing something, which says that we need to recognize that what we have here is an invasion that is threatening to the people of Texas, because our governments are instituted to protect the people of America. That's why the government was formed in the first place, was to protect people. That's its primary function, to protect us from people, from bad people abroad coming in and doing something, to protect us from bad people within the country. And when you describe the fact that we now have the cartels on both sides of the border controlling the land that they're in, we now have a situation where if that is not an invasion that is killing people, they're not doing it with guns for the most part. They're doing it with drugs. And I feel like we cannot
fentanyl's
see
a
the
weapon of
difference.
mass destruction.
It is.
It's a weapon of mass destruction. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
It is. They are using a weapon that is killing people. They're using it as a weapon to kill people, in addition to making money out of it. I can't imagine what else you could put into a definition of a threat to the American people that would be any greater reason for us to take strong law enforcement, military action to stop it from happening. Now, I understand the involvement of not having our military involved in civilian actions. These are not civilian actions. These are organized surrogate government operations, because in Mexico, the government is controlled by the cartels. They are a part of the government there. And so I think we have every right and owe it to the people of Texas to start taking meaningful action to put an end to this heinous piece of it. And that is the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking. It is in a whole different category than the human refugee operation. And we've got to find a way to separate those two and start protecting the people of Texas.
Well, calling it an immigration crisis is a distraction. It's a distraction because the men and women, you hit the nail on the head. The men and women that have been lured here by false promises or the false belief, this invitation to America, they flood our border and they don't get here for free. So they pay to come here, and the cartels extract a financial price, but the cartels also, to many of these folks, say, hey, listen, we'd like you to carry this one little package, this one little package. And you and I were discussing earlier how lately the cartels have been disguising fentanyl so that it looks like candy. It looks exactly like candy. And when I spoke recently, I described as a young man, well, I still like them, those little candies called Smarties, a little round colored candy, a little tiny thing. It looks just like the rainbow colored fentanyl. The fentanyl was intentionally designed, these pills were intentionally colored to look like candy so that our children will take them. And you've faced this challenge before yourself, Senator, when you have to explain to a mother or father, a family, why their child has died because the child thought they were taking candy or they thought they were taking a particular pill that was intentionally manufactured to seduce the child into taking it and costing them their life. If you're not furious about that, if you don't recognize that as a threat to every child, every man, woman, and child in the United States, rich, poor, it does not matter. This is a danger to everyone. And many people say, oh, that can't happen in our neighborhood. We live in a good neighborhood. My child goes to a good school. This is a safe area. We're far away from the border. I am sorry. It is there. It is on your doorstep. And I so appreciate you addressing it this way, because this is an existential threat to our country. We're going to be weakened. We're losing control of our border, and a nation without borders is not a nation. It's not a sustainable situation. And the threat continues to escalate every single day. We saw more and more drug come in last year than the year before that. And it's going to be even higher now. The higher the number of immigrants, the greater distraction to our law enforcement, the more drugs come in, the more danger to you and me and our kids. And we cannot sustain this. And it's not just fentanyl. It's a whole catalog of medications and drugs that are coming in. We've got to do something about it to secure our border.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this is about. This is the message we've got to get to the people to address the real threat here, and that is what's happening. And it's a shame. The media is totally ignoring all of these deaths. You get almost no reporting from the media on them, and yet they're occurring in there. So, well, we've. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover real quickly here before we have to let the people go?
Well, sir, I think that we just need to remind them that it's not just fentanyl, it's many other drugs. We need to recognize that not allowing people to walk across the border into the United States does not make us bad people. We do them a favor. We are doing the men and women who believe they're coming here for a better life. We do them a favor when we make them come here legally and lawfully. Because if they come here illegally, they're forever under the thumb. If they come here illegally, they're forever under the thumb of the cartels. They believe they've gotten away, and the cartels knocks on their door at some point in the future and says, we need you to do one other thing. They'll have them forever. If we make them come legally, then they can enter a pathway to citizenship or get their green card and work here legally and lawfully. If they come illegally, they're forever under the thumb of the cartels, and they will use them to transport drugs, to transport weapons, to disguise the flow of terrorists in our country. It's a disaster. We must act. And I thank you so much for what you're doing to bring this to people's attention. We need to be aware. We've got to take action. We need to be strong. It's not always pleasant, not always comfortable. We have to step outside our comfort zone, just like the men and women who made Texas, who stepped out of their comfort zone and said, we can't hide behind a rule. We have to make a new rule. We have to take action. We have to be decisive. Thank you, Senator, for having me. I really appreciate it. I've talked a long time. I've talked farther than I should, but thank you.
No, the information you provided is fantastic. I appreciate it. And folks, the takeaway from this is our border issue is not one of immigration, as Dr. Spiers said. This is not an immigration issue. This is a killing Americans issue. This is an invasion by a terrorist organization that is sole purpose is to make money, and if they can kill a lot of people while they're at it, it's just incidental to doing business. And we have got to stop allowing the compassion aspect of allowing the folks in the states, because they're supposedly fleeing oppression, which is false in 99.9% of the cases. They're simply being, to repeat myself, they're simply being used as cover for the cartels in their drug and trafficking, human trafficking, child trafficking, sex trafficking operations in there. And it's time we put it to an end. It's time that we declared in meaningful terms that the cartels are a terrorist organization, and we need to take whatever action is necessary to stop it. And hopefully that will soon take place. In the meantime, this is our update on one border issue, one of the biggest ones out there, and the problem of what's happening with America with fentanyl. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with another aspect that will be just as serious as what this is, of reasons we need to take action. So thank you for being here with us today. I appreciate it. May God bless you, and God bless Texas.